Hello again, Coffee Chat friends. Just have a few moments in an airport here to give a little video on our last Coffee Chat, which was held at Venice House in Saskatoon, and it was on the topic of wealth. Once again, I think we had about 20 to 23 people there, and we went around the room and everybody gave their comments on wealth. I'll just have a rundown of some of the recurring, or some of the things that kind of ideas that popped out at me. There was a lot to do, of course, with the idea of money, but not as much as I would have thought. There was a lot of emphasis on friendship, health, education, freedom, feelings of being blessed. Freedom was mentioned several times. Money as energy. Somebody mentioned that there are only two types of groups who actually make money in the world, and that is the government and counterfeiters. Everybody else earns it. That might have been a quote from Bob Proctor, actually. Balance has a lot to do with wealth in terms of priorities. But there's and the nature of humanity to be competitive as well has to do with wealth, somebody said. However, in that kind of a model, one can tend to work themselves to death. And somebody said that they saw somebody work themselves to death as a result of this having to have whatever was perceived as wealth, I suppose. There was the book Think and Grow Rich came up several times. Somebody read a little bit from that. Wealth of knowledge is a wealth. Physical health was brought up numerous times. Having good health care and taking care of the disabled is important, somebody said. Riches was mentioned, the word riches, in reference to quality versus quantity. Somebody said that Coffee Chat is an example of wealth. Somebody mentioned that what is most precious to us is what we could say as well. Somebody said that it has a lot to do with our unconscious or subconscious training. Somebody mentioned the word abundance. Once again, in reference to quality versus quantity. Somebody mentioned that through empirical evidence that money doesn't make them happier because they've experienced a situation of having more money, having less money. They didn't notice a difference in happiness quotient, you might say. Now, I don't have a lot of time here, so we had a lot of discussion afterwards. And I'm just going to go over some of the comments that I had made there as well. I brought in a printout of an essay from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's on wealth. Because when I started to think about this, I remembered a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which was that he said once that the first wealth is health. So I thought I'd look him up, and I found this article from him. And if you haven't read any Ralph Waldo Emerson before, 4 pages is like a book. You could spend a week or more on it. It's incredibly condensed. The man has an amazing grasp of the English language. And of course, it's written well over 100 years ago, so there's different terminology used and so on. But bear in mind that Ralph Waldo Emerson is what was termed to be a naturalist, which is that his concept of divine was intricately involved in nature. It was separate from nature. In fact, in his article, he uses nature with a capital N at times and nature with a small n at times. So nature with a capital N is like the godliness, and the N is like the created, the small n rather. I'm just going to go through some of the quotes that I pull out here, which I thought were particularly significant, but I recommend anybody who likes Emerson, who really wants a good look at somebody who's really thought this thing through. to read the essay called Wealth. You can just Google it and you'll find it. He starts out by saying that every man is a consumer. My take on that is what he's really meaning. Some of these words, we got to look at them for what they are. And my take on it is that we are conduit for energy. He talks about man's constitution. The constitution, what are we really? And he says that we are expensive. And my take on that is that we're precious. And therefore, he makes the point throughout some of the article that it's almost like we need to be rich in order to truly live. He talks about how the source of wealth, and bear in mind he's using the reference here of money a lot of times, because he even makes the point that is the measuring stick a lot of times. But he uses that. And he says that wealth is the result of the application of mind with nature. In other words, the bringing of abundance to where it is costly. And he talks about it's not necessarily about industry or saving, but about better order in how we conduct ourselves, the better order of it. He uses the word craft a lot, using our craft. And in the example of bringing forth where things abound to where they are costly. He talks about the beginning of wealth. Where does wealth begin in the possibility? Well, when one recognizes the tools of possibility. And he alludes to something, he doesn't use the term Maslow, because Maslow maybe came after him, I'm not sure. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we have to have the basics before we can aspire to any sort of higher realm. And he talks about the tools of wealth, which he refers to as faculties a lot of times, the faculties of man, and what we have the capacity to evolve through those capacities. That's the real wealth, not the money. He talks about this at some point where the money follows that, essentially. He uses the term she to refer to nature with a capital N. Very often the feminine, he says, or is indicating. And he talks about self-reliance in terms of nature, capital N. She requires us to be self-reliant if we truly want to be wealthy. And he talks about how the philosophers and the pulpits and all these sort of things have denigrated riches. But yet he says that man is born rich with the tools of potential riches. I'll just read some of his quotes directly. He is a rich man who can avail himself with all men's faculties. The world is his tool chest. Oh, that's not mine yet. Okay. He is successful just so far as he marries, as is the marriage of his faculties with nature. He also says that, on the contrary, poverty demoralizes. A man in debt is so far a slave. And he talks about the integrity of man being diminished with poverty. Because he's talking about how riches is more of a fulfilling life, whereas poverty is more of a less healthy life. In terms of health, meaning wholeness, so it's less whole. To be rich, because we're born rich, that's our potential. The more we aspire to that, the more we experience that, the healthier we are holistically. And he's pointing to that, though not in direct terms, that's my understanding. He talks about men of sense, and of course he's using the word man most of the time here because that was the way they talked then, right? But men of sense esteem wealth to be the assimilation of nature to himself. So, as a naturalist, he doesn't see nature as separate from man. So when man assimilates the power of nature to himself, he experiences riches. He talks about wealth is why the universe, and he uses capital U in cases too. So the capitalized is kind of like the divine. This is why the universe exists, he talks about. He talks about monomaniacs, I never heard that term before, as those who change the world, in other words. These are people who, they find a single purpose, which is fulfilling to their soul, if you will. They will not let it go. They talk it up in the markets, they talk it up in the common places, they talk it up wherever they can, and they make a difference in the world. He quotes other people. He has a Persian saying here. It says, kings are said to have long arms, but men should have long arms as well. But every man should have long arms. He talks about the demand of riches as being legitimate in that sense. But he also talks about, I have never seen a rich man. In other words, I've never seen a fully rich man. There's nobody who's completely healthy. We're all on the verge of learning. We're always learning, right? He talks once again about the pulpits and the press who have denounced the thirst for wealth in man. Yet he points out that the urge within man is to be rich and is to be wealthy. So that it's contrary to the nature within man, what is preached a lot of times to us. But he also talks about the responsibility, or the individual responsibility, and how we become rich. Because he says, he quoted Goff here, who says that nobody should be rich but those who understand it. You talk about the secret and these sorts of things that have been passed down through the years to truly understand ourselves, to understand riches. Man is born rich. Man is born to be rich, or inevitably grows rich by the use of his faculties. It's another quote. He talks about the right merchant. He uses the term merchant a lot because that is a good examination of the nature of man as the merchant in terms of law and equity, you might say. He doesn't use the word equity, but I like that term. He said he's a man of common sense. He talks about how becoming rich is the same as the obedience of the law of particles. He uses the term the law of particles in terms of what goes on in the subatomic. What we can learn in physics, we can see as parallel in our lives. There's no separation. He talks about money is representative and follows the nature and fortune of the owner. The coin is a delicate meter, if you will. It's a way of keeping score, but not necessarily to others, keeping score of ourselves. So our riches in whatever we would, and he talks about the coin here as representative, but whatever our riches is an indication of how we live our lives, the nature of how we live our lives. He talks about the dollar as having no value, but is representative of value. So in and of itself, it has no value. He talks about wealth is mental, and wealth is moral. And he talks about wealth bringing checks and balances, and I would add the term equity to that. He talks about, one other quote he has here is, the law of nature plays through trade. So if we observe trades, observe markets, we can see the laws of nature. Conversely, he talks about legislation punishes itself by regulating gluts and bankruptcies. So the legislation is an attempt to thwart the nature of flow, if you will. It's a constipation of, if you will, of the natural order of things. And everything is connected, so if you constipate something, you have bloats and bankruptcies and so on. The ancient poet, he says, he quotes the ancient poet who says, the gods sell all things at a fair price. He talks about, though, that we are all different in potential. Our potential is different. He says that, he talks about every man having some faculty which enables him to do some feat impossible to any others. which he talks about being sort of precious and necessary to society. So we're each really valuable and we have something to give. Nothing is beneath us as long as it is in the direction of our life. He talks about how society has never prospered, but will never prosper, but must always be bankrupt until every man does that which he is created to do. And I would say that that's also along the lines of freedom. No man is freedom until every man is free. Or we never have complete freedom until every man is free, basically. He talks about how savings and unexpensiveness will never keep the most pathetic family from ruin. So he talks about, and I think that there's actually parables about that. The parable of talents in the Bible, for example, is a good one for that. The one who held back ends up with nothing. He talks about success never lies in the amount of dollars or money, but in relation to income and outgo. So that's what's key, income and outgo, not so much how much. He also uses the metaphor of the seed in one paragraph in terms of reaping what we sow, something like that. We are what we are, in other words. He uses maxims, and he uses that term maxims. These are pithy statements of very old origin, of profound truths in a way. He talks about one maxim of the trader is basically money is another kind of blood. Basically, it's like a lifeblood for the trade, right? And if we stop the flow of blood, we see what happens. Same with the body. If we stop the flow of blood, we see what happens. And once again, the parable of talents, where the one who moved the money gained more, and the one who held back and became like a constipated and essentially dies of his equity, if you will. He talks about the counting room maxims. You could say the maxim of an accountant may be literally expounded by the laws of the universe. That's a big statement for sure. He talks about the merchant's economy as a coarse symbol of the soul's economy. And once again, he says the merchant has but one rule: to absorb and to invest. Once again, the parable of talents. The one who just absorbed and put it under a mattress or whatever, lost it. But the one who invested it then gained the wise investment gains, right? He talks about body vigor, which he alludes to this being includes the results of the body and the mind and so on in terms of what we create. Also aids in more mental and moral vigor. All in all, he talks about true thrift, because there's truth to every word in a way, is not holding back, but in spending on a higher plane. And he ends up by saying that spending on these higher planes moves towards the spiritual and does not relish in augmenting the animal experience. That was a few things I have to share on this topic of wealth. Hope it spurs some ideas. And I think my flight's going to get called pretty soon from Calgary here. So I hope to see you in a few weeks. All the best for now. Bye-bye.